right, good evening.
Yeah.
All right, here we are. We're back, rounding it out. It's at the final, almost at the final week of Maseches, the final full week of Maseches. Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so we are sponsored for the week by Josh and Chana Bernstein in honor of their son Pinny's upcoming bar mitzvah, and we're sponsored tonight by Rabbi Avi Wald in honor of his father, who does his best to make it out to the Daf Yomi Shiur every night.
Your son's too sweet.
Yes,
I know.
That's good.
I'll tell you, he came home today and he went right out and he started shoveling driveways all on our street. He made some cash to support his hockey card addiction. And he has some miser. He wanted to sponsor the Daf.
Wow.
Is that something else?
How about his jerseys?
It's amazing.
He also has sponsors for jerseys. That's true.
All right, good.
That is true.
It's good. It's good. We are proud to be his Meiser donation location.
That's right.
Right.
Say thank you.
I shall.
We do. Absolutely. We are up to Hamalik Kazayas Min Ola, 2 dots towards the middle of the page, probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom. Hamalik Kazayas Min Ola. So Mishnah had said you have a Kazayas Min Ola that you're burning. So this Kazayas Min Ola is made up half of meat and half of emurim, which are the burned parts. Both parts are burned for an ola, but meat is burned by an ola, but usually not burned for other korbanos. Usually that's the part that's eaten. So the Gemara derives ola ve'emureha in shlomim ve'emurehen lo. This rule that you can combine the meat and the emurin, which is the fats that get burnt, that rule is talking about by the ola, but not by a shlomim, because the shlomim, the emurim, are supposed to be burned, but the meat is supposed to be eaten. Tanina lahadid tana rabbanan. Our Mishnah is saying that which we learned in a brayso. Ola ve'emureha mitzarfim lekazayis la'alosan bachutz. An ola and it's in an ola and it's the meat and the burned parts can combine together for kazayis to make you liable for burning it outside. Also, you can combine those together since they are in the same category in order to be liable because of pigul, right? Consuming pigul, nosar, the leftover meats, and also tame meats. So, bishlam ha'alas ola dikalil in shlamim lo. So fine, I understand when it comes to the burning of an ola, right? That's usually the ola, everything is burned together. So then I understand why that yes and a shlomim no, right? Ela pigul v'nosar v'tamei, my taima. Why would pigul, nosar, and tamei, why does it make any difference? In all of the other circumstances, these are all the parts of when we learn pigul, we learned that anything that was a terminal avoda, right? That is going to be a prohibition of consuming that outside of its proper time. You are chayav for pigul. So all of it, as we're going to see in a moment, really, it should combine together. V'atznam, we learned in Mishnah, kolaf pigulin mitzarfin. All of the parts of a pigul korban can combine together. So if you eat a kazayis of any part of a pigul korban, they combine together. Also, any leftover parts of a korban, if you eat them, they're also going to be combined together, and you could be liable. So kasha pigul, kasha nosar. So you've got a contradiction when it comes to pigul, and you've got a contradiction when it comes to nosar. Is it supposed to be combined together, or is it not? So pigul lo kasha. So let's say pigul and pigul is not a contradiction. Kan be pigul, kan be machshavas pigul. There's a difference between the consumption of pigul, where you do combine together any part of the korban, and then there's the thought that had to do with pigul. When we have the thought that was having to do with pigul, we said that if you have in mind to eat half of a kazayas and to burn half a kazayas, those are two different thoughts. They don't combine together. So that's where it doesn't combine together. But as far as eating of the pigul itself, so then they do combine together. So that's answer number one. We understand it's two different circumstances. Nosar and nosar lo kasha. And as far as leftover meats are concerned, kan ben nosar, so that which we said everything combines together when you're eating nosar. Kan nissosoru ad shelo nizrak hadam. The shenito, I should pronounce it wrong. Shenitosru, right? When something is left over, the Tosefta is talking about when the emurim and the meat don't combine by a shlamim is when they are being left over before the throwing of the blood, right? Let's say, for example, the meat or the emurim were lost before the throwing of the blood. And all you've got is half a kazayas left over from the meat, or half a kazayas left over from the fats that you're going to, one is you're going to eat half a kazayas.
Have you ever found the lost meat at the end?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. What are you supposed to do before you find it? If you find it in the end, okay, great. Then go ahead and, right, as long as it didn't leave the azara, as we have talked about. But here, right, you can't go ahead and throw the blood. That's the issue. Once you've got less than the amount that you can eat and less than the amount that you can burn, throwing that blood becomes something you can't do. You can't throw the blood for a meaningless korban. So therefore, you wouldn't have a circumstance where you lost the meat through the blood and then found it again because you wouldn't throw this blood, right? And that's according to money. This is Rabbi Yeshua. This is Rabbi Yeshua. The same Rabbi Yeshua we had, maybe it's about a week and a half ago, when we're talking about whether we could throw the blood and give the skins to the Kohen, right? Rabbi Yeshua said, sure you can. Why? Because the meat is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You can just throw the blood for the sake of the skins. This Rabbi Yeshua says, the reverse, right? He says you can't throw the blood. You're not going to be able to throw the blood and give him the skins because without the meat, you can't throw the blood. Here, that's what he's saying too. So it's Rabbi Yeshua. Tanya, we learn Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Yeshua says, "Kol hazvachim shebat Torah." Any korban in the Torah, shenishtayer behen kazayis basar v'kazayis chelev. If you have a kazayis of the meat, and you have a kazayis of the fats, either one, right? Then zorekas adam. You're allowed to throw the blood now because you're at least going to be able to have something that you're going to perform the korban with. You're going to eat something. You're going to burn something. Chatzi zayis basar v'chatzi zayis chelev. But if you have half a kazayis of meat, half a kazayis of chelev, eino zorek, because you can't throw the blood, right? Because one is burnt, one is eaten. Those those don't connect together, and therefore you're not going to throw this blood. Ube'ola, but not true when it comes to an ola. When it comes to an ola, chatzi zayis basar v'chatzi zayis chelev zorekas adam. If you have half a kazayis of meat, half a kazayis that's burnt, you can throw that blood mipnei shekula kolil because you're going to burn all of it anyway. Mincha, when it comes to a mincha, fila kula kayemes, even if you've got the entire korban mincha around, lo yizrok mincha. Right then, you can't throw the blood, right? That's what it sounds like, right? If you got the whole mincha there, you can't throw the blood. Well, Mara says, Maya Vidate, what are you talking about? There's no blood by a korban mincha. Korban mincha is made out of flour. There's no flour there. Amar Rav Papa says, Minchas nesachim habayim hazevach. We're talking about the wine and the flour, the wine that comes together with a korban, an animal korban. Let's say I've got an animal korban, and I've got the blood here, and I lost all the meat. But hey, I've got all the wine. Can I throw the blood knowing that I'm going to pour the wine? No. Even if I've got all of the wine or I've got all of the flour in order to give the mincha that goes together with the korban, without the meat, I can't throw the blood. That's his point. Okay, so, next Mishnah. Excuse me. Almost. Hakometz v'havona v'aktoras. If we've got a kometz, the kamitza, again, we scoop out the portion of the korban mincha. We'll talk all about it in Menachos. Levona, the frankincense, and which is put together on the mincha. Haktoras, which is the incense that's burned as spices. Minchas kohanim, it's going to be the mincha offering that the kohanim are bringing, and that's important because the mincha offering kohanim bring is completely burned on the mizbeach, right? They don't get to keep, they don't get to eat any of their own korban mincha. Minchas kohen mashiach, also the korban mincha that is brought half in the morning, half in the afternoon by the kohen gadol. Minchas nesachim shehikriv me'echad mehen kazayetz bachutz. Or the minchas nesachim, if I've got the mincha that comes together with a korban, and if you'd taken any of these offerings and you bring a kazayas of these offerings outside, you're chayev, right? You can't burn any of these items outside. Rabbi Elazar poter ad shiakriv is cool. Rabbi Elazar says no, all or nothing. You have to bring not a kazayas is not enough. You've got to burn the entire thing outside. Bring the entire thing outside, then you're chayiv. If not, you're not chayiv. The kulan shekrivam bifnim, the shir mehen kazayis. However, right? If you brought all of these as a korban inside the Beis Hamikdash, and you had a kazayas left over, all you had left, and then you bring that, then you're chayev, according to everybody, then you're chayev. Why? Rabbi Eliezer just requires you to bring everything that you have left. If all you have left is a kazayas, and that's what you bring outside, then you're chayev. If you have the entire offering, bringing a kazayas is meaningless. You have to bring all of it. That's Rabbi Eliezer's consistent view, is that you've got to bring everything you have left. However, he agrees that you can be chayev a kazayas if that's all that's left. The kulan shechasru kol shehu, the kriva bachutz potter, and everyone also agrees that if you have these korbanos and you're missing a part of the korban, that's going to invalidate it from being brought as a korban inside the azara. Since missing any section of any amount of this korban goes missing, the entire thing is puzzle. So now, if you burn any of it outside, it's also your potter, you're exempt because it's not a korban anymore. Hamakriv kodshim ve'imurim bachutz chayev. If somebody brings kodshim, the meat of the if somebody brings meat of kodshim and the fats of kodshim together, they're mixed together, you got a piece that has both on it at once, so then you're chayev. Okay, now we'll discuss what that teaches us. It seems like nothing that's brand new, but that the first part was new, but why that last part, we'll see it in the Gemara. It says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan Rabbi's horse, Hamaktir kazayas bachutz chayev. If you burn a kazayas of ketores outside of the azara, you're chayev. Chati pras bifnim potter. Now, if you take half of a pras, the amount of the ketores that was brought was a pras, so they would take a pras. Now, the Torah never tells us how much ketores to bring. It doesn't say you need a pras, but they would. That was the pras was the amount that. Let's see if he brings what a pras. Chamishim dinarim. I don't know, which is half a mana. I'm not exactly sure how much that is in terms of actual weights. What a pras is in terms of modern weights. But okay, but that was the shear that was supposed to be for the ketores. Now, if he goes in, let's say, and he has he burns half of a pras, which is less than the mitzvah of what you're supposed to be bringing, so then you're exempt. So now the Gemara wants to know, my potter. Who's potter? What does that mean? You're burning ketores inside. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? So potter zar. So what we mean is, if a non-Kohen does it, a non-Kohen who does the avoda, he's chayav misa. So if this person burns half of a pras inside, he's exempt. So am I. Why should that be? Haktorahi. You're burning ketores. And after all, once you get a kazayas, you should be chayev, a zar. So therefore, why is it that if he brings so much more than a kazayas, up to half a pras, he's not liable? So Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rav Chisda. Zera explains this. He says the name of Rav Chisda. Amar Reb Yirmiyah, Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, the name of Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. Amar Rav. My potter. What does it mean? He's exempt. Potter tzibur. He means that he has exempted the community from bringing the ketores. If a Kohen goes in and he brings less than a pras, he brings half a pras, even though that's not the desired amount, as we said, since the Torah doesn't specify, that's acceptable, and you're okay. Amar Reb Zera. So Reb Zera says, "Ikashali hakashali." He says, but if you want to ask the question between the Brisa and the Mishnah, right? That wasn't bothering me. This idea, but here's what does bother me. Hamar Rav Allah. Beha Afi Rabbi Eliezer Moda. Rav said about this brisa that in such a circumstance, in this circumstance, Rabbi Eliezer would agree. Deha Rabbi Eliezer lav haktorahi. Because Rabbi Eliezer lav haktorahi kamar. Because Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold in our Mishnah that if you bring half of a pras of ketores, that you'd be liable. Now, that's going to be a problem because Rabbi Eliezer had said that if you bring, you have to bring the full shear in order to be liable. So if Rabbi Eliezer holds in our Mishnah that if you bring half of a pras of Ketores, you'd be liable, right? Because that's not the shear, right? Because it says, right? We said if it doesn't bring the full shear, that's what our Mishnah said. If he doesn't bring the full shear, you're not liable. Then how can you be yotze inside with half of a pras? That shouldn't work. So Amar Rabba says, Baktora de Heichal. He says you have to make two distinctions. There's two different places we do Ketores. One is every day in the Beis Hamikdash, the small altar, we burn Ketores. That's one. And then there's another Ketores that we burn on Yom Kippur. Right? We take two handfuls, and we go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and we burn it onto a shovel of coals. Okay, so now you have to make a distinction. Amar Rabba, Torah de Heichal, when you're talking about the Ketores, which is in the Beis Hamikdash, the Kuliyama lo pligi, right? Nobody is going to argue in that circumstance, right? That a kazayas is enough. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer is going to agree. That's what it means. Rabbi Eliezer agrees. Since a kazayas is a significant amount by the regular ketores, therefore, if you go outside of the Beis Hamikdash and you burn a kazayas, okay, you'll be liable. Ki pligi b'haktara difnim. The argument in our Mishnah, where Rabbi Eliezer says you have to bring the whole amount and not part of the amount, is the ketores that you're doing on Yom Kippur. That ketores. Demar savar melochov nov dafka, umar savar melochov nov lav dafka. The argument here is, when it says in the Torah that you need your two handfuls, is that required or is that ideal? Right? Meaning that if I have less, if I have half of it, if I have less than that shear, am I yotze or not? So Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it has to be the full shear. So therefore, since that needs to be the full shear, if I bring less than that outside, on a mizbeach outside, then I'm not liable because I didn't fulfill it. And the Tanakama, the Archachamim, right, that says that you're obligated outside in a kazayas, they hold that you don't really need melochaf nov, right? Even if you bring just a kazayas, you'd be yotze. Therefore, bringing a kazayas outside is also a prohibition. So Amar le Abaye says that is an untenable solution because v'haki kaksiva chuka b'aktar difnim hu dechsiv. Remember that we had learned when it comes to kachim, if the word chok is written, that means it's required. And when we read through by Yom Kippur, the avoda of Yom Kippur, it says there the word chok, and it's talking about burning the incense inside. There's no opinion that holds, yeah. What's our shear?
The Hebrew word pras, pronounced pras or paras, is an ancient unit of measurement with modern equivalent, depending on whether it is used for volume or weight or time.
And it doesn't tell us what it is. It just tells it is a measure. Oh well. Okay. It is indeed a measure.
I'll continue.
You continue. Look. Okay. To be determined. Still. Okay. So, but that means that everyone agrees that you need the two fists. Therefore, there would be no opinion that says you could be liable for a kazayas based on the ketores of the inside, right? That wouldn't be the argument. You couldn't say that Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim are arguing about if you bring a kazayas of ketores from the Yom Kippur avoda outside, because no one would agree that you'd be liable in that circumstance. Ella Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, I'll explain to you the argument here. Nobody argues when it comes to the Haktara on Yom Kippur. In order to be liable, in order to fulfill your obligation on Yom Kippur, you need melochaf nov, you need your handfuls. That means that in order to be liable for burning that outside, you also need two handfuls, because it has to be a violation. You have to do whatever you were going to do inside. Ki pligi b'haktara dechutz. The argument is, what if you are burning from the incense of the everyday incense? Mar savar yalfinan pnim michutz, umar savar lo yalfinin. The question is, right, according to the Tanakam, the argument, one says, since a kazayas is all you need in order to be liable for burning incense, or to fulfill your obligation to burn incense on the Ketores on an everyday basis. Therefore, if you took a kazayas of the Yom Kippur, according to the Chacham, if you took a kazayas of the Yom Kippur, you'd also be liable if you burnt that outside. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's two different things. One is Yom Kippur service, one is the regular Ketores. Just because a kazayas is okay by the regular Ketores doesn't mean it's acceptable by the Yom Kippur service. And therefore, if that's not what's necessary by the Yom Kippur service, you can't burn that outside and be liable. That's what they're arguing about, says Abaye. Amar Rava says, time out, that doesn't make sense. Hashta chutz mi chutz lo yalfi, Rabbanan, pnimi chutz mi bai. So, the Rabbanan don't even learn. You're suggesting that the Rabbanan are learning that you're obligated for burning a kazayas of Ketores from the Yom Kippur service outside? Because why? Because they're learning that you would be because you're learning the Yom Kippur avoda from the regular Ketores. Like that's a little bit far fetched. You're saying that since a kazayas of regular Ketores is acceptable, therefore if you burn a kazayas of the Yom Kippur service outside, it's also liable. We don't even learn volumes and measurements from two external offerings. What are we talking about? Mahi, what are we talking about there? Detanya, we learn a brisa. Yachol hamal lepachos mikazayas komet upachos mikazayas imurin. You might think that if you burn outside of the azara, you burn less than a kazayas of a kamitza, or less than a kazayas of the fats that are burned, or you pour less than 3 lug of wine, which is the shear that you need to pour for wine, or less than 3 lug of water, which you pour water service. So we change it to right. It's the water service that we pour on Sukkos. Yeh chayev. You might think that you would be liable for pouring less. Talmud lomar la'asos. Therefore, the pasuk says to do it, meaning ala sholim chayev ve'eno chayev ala chaser. You have to do the entire amount, not a lesser amount.
Prize could also mean prize or award.
Yes, not in this case. So,
too, right?
Persia Pras is also the name for Persia. That is correct. That is also true. V'ha pachos mishloshes lugin de isbehu kama zeisim. So 1 second though, if you're suggesting, right, that if I pour less than 3 lug, right, then I'm not liable because that's the amount of wine. But why don't we learn from the Ketores? We're learning the outside, the Ketores. Why don't we learn? There's lots of kazesim in a lug. A kazayas is a much smaller amount. And the Rabbanan don't learn that the Chachamim, v'lo yalfi Rabbanan chutz mi chutz, they don't say, well, since a kazayas is all that you need by some korbanos, right, then therefore all you need to do in order to violate the prohibition of pouring wine is a kazayas. No, you need the full volume. So therefore, we see clearly that the Rabbanan don't say, hey, just because this is the amount that you would be liable in one korban means that that's the amount that you'd be liable in a different korban. So, that's not relevant. Yeah. So therefore, you're not going to say that since the ketores that's in the heichal, the ketores that regular incense offering is a kazayas, therefore you're going to be liable when you burn outside the ketores from Yom Kippur, which is a much different shear. Ela Marava, so Rava says, no, I've got a different answer. Kegon dekav inhu shnei chatzoi pras b'mana. What happened is you took a utensil and you put all of a full volume of a pras into one single utensil. Okay, so now Mar Sava Rabbi Eliezer holds lav milsahi. Mar Savar kvios mana milsahi. Rabbi Eliezer holds that once you put it into one utensil, you have now just turned this into one single offering. Meaning the regular ketores, all you need is a kazayas. But now that you took a pras, which was the amount that you were going to split, that we said midrabanan that you're going to bring, now that you put it all into a utensil and you said this is the amount I'm going to bring, now it's all one thing. So if you put a kazayas up from that now that's not enough. You've already made it into one thing. And Umar Savar, the other side says lav milsahi. That the other side says, no, just because you put it in a utensil, that doesn't mean anything. A kazayas is still a kazayas, you're still liable. Because the kazayas would fulfill your obligation to do the ketores. The kazayas is going to make you liable if you bring it outside. That's the argument. Amar Rava says, Hashta, now, Leman damar kiviyusa demana velo klumhu. According to the opinion that says that putting a utensil is meaningless, kava shisha lepar, let's say you take 6 lugin, which is half a hin. That's the amount of nisuch, of wine that you need for a bull. Large offering, you need a chatzi ahin, lapar, right? That's going to be a large amount. 6 lugin. Umashach mehen arba, and now what'd you do? You poured off 4 of these lugin, and you use it for one animal. Vikrivan bachutz, and you are going to burn, and you bring them outside. Chayiv, you'd be liable. Why? Because what's 4 lug for? Sheru'uyin la'ayil. That's a third of a hin, which is the amount that you're liable for, that you have to bring for a ram. So, despite the fact that if you put all 6 in a utensil, once you bring 4, since that's a eligible amount for service, you're liable, despite the fact that you put all 6 in a utensil together. Kava arba la'ayil, if you put 4 into a container for a ram, umashach mehem shlosha, and you bring 3 of them, vikrivan bachutz, and you pour that outside, you'd be chayev. Why? Because shiru'uyin lekeves, that's the right amount for sheep. So therefore, as long as you have, it doesn't matter how much you actually put in the utensil, as long as you brought the amount that would be reasonable for one of the korbanos, then you're going to be liable for that. Chasru kol shehu. Now, if any part is missing, vikrivan bachutz, potter, and then you bring that outside, now you're exempt. Because now you don't have the shear. Once you're less than that shear, less than 3, there's nothing you can, right? So Ravashi says, Nisuch mehak. So Ravashi, now, okay, so that's his point. His point is, once you hold there's an opinion, doesn't matter how much you put in the utensil, so then we don't say, well, once you put 6 in the utensil, now you're talking about bringing for a bowl. Therefore, you got to bring all 6. No, not true. Even though you put it in a utensil, once you pour out 4, you are liable because you did it enough for a ram. Okay, now Ravashi goes back to Abaye's, back to Rava's question that he had on Abaye. Abaye again had said that we're going to learn that since a kazayas is the right amount for the ketores, if you burn that much incense from the Yom Kippur, you're also liable. That's the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham. That's what the Chacham hold. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you need the 2 handfuls. And Rava says, we don't even learn from one korban to the other. Why would we learn from the ketores of the Yom Kippur from the ketores outside? So Ravashi Amar, no. Nisuch me'ak Torah lo yalfi rabbanon. Af agav dechutz michutz lo yalfi. Haktar me'ak Torah yalfi. He says, well, I'll answer your question, Rava. You might not be able to learn from 2 types of korbanos, right? A kazayas of meat versus a 3 lugin of wine. Those are 2 different things. But this is ketores and ketores. Ketores and ketores, despite the fact that they're different korbanos, they're the same item. So therefore, you can learn ketores from ketores. Even though one is outside ketores, one's inside ketores, the kazayas is the amount, and that's why the Rabbanan might hold that way. So he defends Abaye's position and says that's where it works. Okay, now, next thing we learn is kulan shechasru. All of these korbanos, if you are missing any of the korban, so that korban becomes invalid to be brought inside the azara. You can't be missing any of your kmitza. You can't be missing any of your mincha of a kohen. You have to bring the entire thing. If you're missing any of it, then the whole thing is puzzle. Therefore, if you're missing any of it, if you bring that outside, you're not liable because it's not a valid korban anymore. So he asked the fun question. Let's say it was full, you had everything. You bring it outside and you lose some of it while you're outside. Is that relevant or not? Mian rinon kaven de nafak of ifsalu lahu mali chaser mali yaser. Look, at what point did this korban become invalid? As soon as you left the azara, it became invalid. So now it's already invalid. So who cares if you lose a little bit of the korban? You're not making it more invalid, right? But when it was inside, missing a piece made it invalid. Therefore, that's why it, right? It's a question of whether missing anything made it invalid or not. So since missing a bit made it invalid, that's why you are not liable if you bring it outside. But once I bring it outside, we know that doesn't matter because you obviously have to bring it outside in order to be liable for bringing it outside. Then losing a piece doesn't matter anymore because it's already invalid. Ol dilma, or maybe, yotze de'isi be'enei in delesi be'enei lo. Or when it's brought outside, it has the exact same rules as inside. If you're missing a bit of it outside, if you bring it outside and then you lose a bit, it's no longer a prohibition to burn it outside. And if you have all of it, then it is. Amar Abaye says, Toshma, come listen, Rabbi Eliezer, Poter ad sheyakriv es kulon. Rabbi Eliezer says in the Mishnah that you're exempt unless you burn all of it. Okay, so that means that if you lost any of it, you're not liable. Amar le Rabbi bar Rav Chanan l'Abaye. So Rabbi bar Rav Chanan says to Abaye, "Mid Rabbi Eliezer poshit mar Amar le beferish shmia limine." Second, I'm going too fast there. So he says, right, so we're presuming that Rabbi Eliezer says you're exempt until you bring the entire thing. It doesn't matter. He doesn't say that's only if you lose it inside or outside. It doesn't matter. As long as any of it's lost, you're exempt. So now, Rabbi bar Rav Chanan says to Abaye, Rabbi Eliezer poshit mar. Can you answer Rabbi Eliezer's, could you answer the question? Right, this is, Abaye was answering this question. He says, I don't know if you can really answer that question because we weren't asking on Rabbi Eliezer Shita. We're asking Lefi the Shitas Chachamim, right? According to Rabbi Eliezer, any amount that you're missing invalidates. But according to the Chachamim, it's not any amount that invalidates it because Kazayas would be significant enough. But the question was, once the Korban becomes invalid, that's why you couldn't bring it outside. This is according to the Chachamim Shita we're asking this, not according to Rabbi Eliezer. Of course, according to Rabbi Eliezer, once you're not bringing the entire thing, you're not liable. But according to the Chachamim, who normally say that you don't have to bring the entire thing, normally Kazayas is enough, is the fact that it was full when it left the Azara enough? That's the question. So Abaye says, Beferish shmiya le minaim de Rav. I heard clearly and explicitly from Rav, Ad kan lo pligi rabbanon alei de Rabbi Eliezer, that the Chachamim do not disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, Ella de'ise be'enei, except when the entire korban is around, right? Then they argue when you have the entire thing. Rabbi Eliezer says you got to bring the entire thing, and the Chachamim say no, a kazayis is enough. However, if you're missing part of the korban, module lav de chaser b'chutz. So he says he agrees that even if you lose it outside, then once it's missing some of it, it's gone. Then a kazayas isn't even going to be enough, right? So the Gemara says, "Lo, no. What are you talking about, Rav? He said that. That's true, but maybe Rav meant that's only when it was missing some of it inside, and that's what invalidated it. It's not necessarily that Rav was saying that once it goes outside and then you lose a bit there that it's invalid. So." Doesn't answer the point. So Toshma, so we'll try again. The Chulon, right? Everything in the Mishnah, this Brisa says, our Mishnah says, the Chulon shechaser v'krivim b'chutz potter. In all of the cases of our Mishnah, if you're missing some of it and you bring it outside, you are exempt, even according to the Chachamim. So doesn't that mean lav dechatzer b'chutz? Doesn't that mean literally that you, even if you lost outside? No, it doesn't mean that. Dechatzer b'fnim. Even if it was lost, it means that it was lost inside. Then if it got some of it lost inside, then the korban became invalid. So the answer is there's no real final answer on that question. We don't know whether if you lose it outside, it's different than if you lose a piece of it inside. Sure, if you lose a piece of it inside, then that invalidates, and then there's no such thing as bringing the korban, burning it outside. But once it went outside first, that we're not sure about. Then the Mishnah ended off.
If it went outside first, then you can bring it back in.
If it went outside first, you're not supposed to bring it back in. Correct, right? Once it's then it's supposed to be burnt where it is. But not as a korban, right? If you bring it up, if you're mal with the chutz, then as a korban, then it's a problem.
Inside of it.
It's not a tuma issue. It's called yotze, right? It left the azara. And once it leaves the azara, it's a problem. Okay, so now, last thing the Mishnah said, hamakriv kodshim, if you bring meat of kodshim, meat of a korban, together with the fat of the korban, so then you're chayev. So amai, why should that work? V'haika chatzitza. You have a chatzitza. What's a chatzitza? Chatzitza is when something blocks the connection, right? We've had that a lot when you go to the mikvah, right? Where you have anything on your skin when you go to the mikvah, or we had a kli that had a sticker on where you can't bring that. That's a chatzitza.
If you're talking about something with a sticker and it's not really kosher, you have to take out, remove the sticker and trouble it again.
That's correct. So now here, if the prohibition is me burning the fats, there's no prohibition against burning the meat because meat doesn't have to be burned. So if I have regular kachim and I have meat, then I'm not really burning the fat on the mizbeach that's outside because the meat is in between.
Really, you bring the meat just to get to the fat.
So therefore, the issue is, why should you be liable, right? Because you're not really burning the fat; the meat is there. So Amar Shmuel keshehavchan. The answer Shmuel says when you flip it over. Now the fat is directly on the fire. Okay, that's his answer. Yochanan Amar Rabbi Yechiva says afilu tema shalavchan. Even if you don't flip it over, V'hamani, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Shimon, this is Rabbi Shimon's opinion. To Amar, he says, afilu al selachayv. He says you don't need to have it on a mizbeach. He says even if you put it on a rock, meaning burning it outside doesn't mean that you actually have to have a mizbeach with the korban on it. As long as it's being burnt in any circumstance, it is a problem. Okay, so now Rav Amar min b'mino eno chotzitz. Rav says, no, meat and fats are really all of the same type, animal parts. So therefore, there's no chatzitza. We always have said, right? There's no chatzitza, right? My fingernails are not a chatzitza for my skin. They're all part of me. So therefore, that's not a chatzitza if it's the same item, right? So therefore, that is not a chatzitza. It's not a problem. So those are three different answers. Next Mishnah. Mincha shalom nikmitza. If I have a korban mincha and I have not done kmitza on it, well, that means it's not been activated. It's not a korban yet until you've done kmitza. V'ikriva b'chutza. Now you burn it outside. Pater, you're exempt. It's not a korban, right? Komtza v'chazar komtza l'socha. If I take a kmitza, but I put the kmitza back into the container, v'ikriva. Now I burn it b'chutz. You're chayiv. Now you're liable because the kmitza is in there. So therefore, I'm burning the kmitza. So the Gemara wants to know. V'amai, why should I be liable? Livatli shirayim lekomets. What happened to bittul? There's more shirayim, more leftover in there than there is kmitza. And therefore the kmitza is gone. Once you've mixed it back in, it should be gone. So Amar Rabbi Zera says, Nemra haktara bakomets, v'nemra haktara b'shirayim. So it says, in the psukim, the word haktara, to burn, by the komets, and it says the word haktara by the leftover parts of the mincha, right? It says there, it says, lo saktir mimenu ishel Hashem, you're not supposed to burn it. So use the word haktir to burn it, right? Ma'aktar's komets, ein komets mevato chavero. Just like when you're burning the kmitza, right? One kmitza isn't nullifying another kmitza. Let's say I have the kmitza from I have one bowl, I put kmitza from 5 different offerings into this. Theoretically, each kmitza should be batal because there's 4 other kmitzas that are more than it. But we learned that one kmitza doesn't nullify the other kmitza. And therefore, if I burn all of those kmitzas, I've fulfilled my obligation and done all 5 sacrifices. So too, if you're burning a kometz mixed together with the rest of the mincha is gzeras hakosov. The pasuk just says it doesn't nullify the kmitza. So therefore, that's the point of our Mishnah, that even if you put the kmitza back in, it doesn't nullify it, and you're in violation of burning a kmitza outside and chayev karis. Next Mishnah. Hakometz v'alavona, right? Moving along.
Yeah.
Hakometz v'alavona. One case, it's good we have a Mishnah, one case at a time, it's nice and simple. Next Mishnah says, Hakometz v'alavona, I've got a kmitza, and I've got frankincense. Shekriv es echad mehan bachutz, and I burn one of them outside, you're chayev. You don't need both of them. Normally, when it comes to the korban, you need the kmitza. You have to burn the kmitza and the levona. If I burn either one of them, even though it's half of a matir, right? Remember that when we had pigul, right? Half of a matir. I've only burned half of a matir, right? One is not dependent on the other. Therefore, I'm chayev if I burn either of them. Rabbi Eliezer poter. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you are not. Rabbi Eliezer says you're not chayev. Right? Ad shiakriv is esasheni. You need to bring the second one of them. Now, echad b'fnim, echad b'chutz, chayev. If you've already burned the first one inside, and you burn the second one outside, then you are chayev. Why? Because the first one was done fine. Now the second one is activated to be burning outside. Now you're liable. Right? Sheni, shnei bezichi levona. The 2 spoonfuls of the levona, of the frankincense that was on the table where the shulchan lechem hapanim was. So now shikr ves echad mehem b'chutz, you bring one of them outside, chayiv, you're liable, right? Because either one is its own matir, right? That's the way the Chum look at it. Rabbi Eliezer poter ad sheyakriv es hasheni. That is, you're not liable until you bring the second one. So if you brought both of them outside, you'd be liable. If you bring one inside, echad bifnim v'echad b'chutz, one inside, and the second one outside, you also could be liable. You'd be chayiv there. Okay, says the Gemara. Boi Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha asks the following question: Kometz. Let's say you have a kamitza, right? Ma'u sheyatir kenegdo b'shirayim. If you burn the ketores, the kamitza, right? If you burn the kamitza, which is right one of the two matirim, right? We know that you have to burn the kamitza and then you have to burn the levona, and you only do one of them. What happens to the rest of the korban mincha? Is it mishra shari or kalushe miklash? Is basically each one of them fulfilling? Is each one basically permitting half of the rest of the offering, or is it that each one covers each one of the prohibitors covers the whole offering, right? So basically, it's almost like, look at how the Yisur works. Is we saying the kamitza permits this half of it, and the levona permits this half of it, or is it that the kamitza and the levona create like two layers that you have to take care of? So how do you look at it? So aliba deman. So now we got to figure out, according to whose viewpoint are we asking this? So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Ia liba de Rabbi Meir. We got to go back in time. Remember Rabbi Meir's shita. Rabbi Meir said to Omar, mefaglin b'chatzi matir. Rabbi Meir said, what if you have pigul intent by half of a permitter, right? We said the way that it worked by pigul was that if I have in mind that I'm going to later on consume the item outside its proper time or proper place, then that makes it pigul.
Yeah.
How much of the service do I have to have this in mind for? Here I've got a two-step service. I've got the burning of the kamitza, and I've got the burning of the levona. If I have intent for pigul during the burning of the kamitza, but not the levona, or vice versa, right? He says you can create pigul with just that. So therefore, according to him, mishra shari. Obviously, since you can make a pigul with each half, that means that you're accomplishing something. You have to accomplish something, otherwise something has to be permissible. Because the way that pigul works is, I am having in mind during a service which is matir, which is permitting something else. If these two prohibitions are overlapping, this item is now not able to be eaten because there's levona to bring and there's kamitza to bring. Well, once I've had pigul intent by the kamitza, the whole thing is still prohibited. So what difference does it make? Why would that be pigul? The answer is must be Rabbi Meir holds that by having pigul intent, that the kamitza would be allowing me to consume half of this offering. Therefore, there's pigul. Okay, so I'm not asking according to Rabbi Meir. That Rabbi Meir's obviously it's permitting half of it. V'ili but the Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan shita, that they say that pigul, you need both of them. So de amri einafagim b'chatzi shir. They say you can't. There's no pigul by half of the service. So lo mishra shari v'lo miklish kolish. He says it really is. It doesn't accomplish anything, right? The mincha is just at the end is just as prohibited. If you just do one, the point is it creates no difference. It makes no distinction. So therefore, it's not permitting it halfway. It's not removing it. One of the permitters, it doesn't do anything, right? He basically, the Rabbanan hold one permitter doing one permitter means absolutely nothing without the other, because you can't create pigul with just half a permitter. So therefore, there's no, it's not accomplishing any of those things. So that's not his question. So it's not according to the Chacham either. Ella liber Rabbi Eliezer. So forget that machlokas. Let's talk about Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham here. So maybe it's according to Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says, right, that if you are bringing just one of the maktirim, if you just bring the levona or the right, what did he say here? He said, Right. Rabbi Yezer says that you have to do both of the matirim in order to be liable. Right. You have to do both the kmitza and the levona. So therefore, one of the Rabbi Eliezer karabanan svirale. So Rabbi Eliezer must be holding like the Rabbanan de Amar ein mefaglin b'chatzi matir. He's holding like the Rabbanan that basically says there's no such thing as half of a matir accomplishing anything. Ella, so rather his question is aliba de Rabbanan dahla. He's asking according to the Rabbanan that are here, right? They're saying that one of these burning either the kmitza or the levona is a prohibition for burning bachutz because it accomplishes something. Now his question is, what is it accomplishing? My mishra shari o kolish miklosh. Is it that it accomplishes permitting half of it, or is it accomplishing weakening the prohibition, halving the prohibition? So teku, we don't have an answer, right? At least we know who the question's according to, but we don't really have an answer how it works. Says the next Mishnah, Hazorik miktzas dam bachutz. If you are throwing some of the blood, right, a little bit of the blood of a korban on the mizbeach outside, you are chayiv. And Rabbi Eliezer, right, and that's even according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, who keeps saying, no, you need to do the entire thing, you need to do not when it comes to the blood. A little bit of the blood, because we know that by the korban, just a little bit of the blood is all you need. Rabbi Eliezer says the same thing. A little blood on the outside is also a violation. Rabbi Eliezer says, af hamenasech mehachag. Also, if you take the water on sukkis and bachag and on sukkis and you pour it bachutz, you're chayiv. Right? Because that is one of the services. Rabbi Nechemia Omer Rechen says, Shiyare Hadam, not only that, but the leftover blood that is normally poured into the base, right? That, Shikriv Bachutz, if you pour that into a base outside, you're also chayav. That's also significant services. Okay, so now, Amar Rava says, Umod Rabbi Eliezer b'damim. Rabbi Eliezer agrees with the blood, that if you throw a little bit of the blood, you're liable. Now, Tanya, how do I know that? Brisa says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Shimon say, Mimakom shepasak hu maschil. Remember, we had discussed before that if you are doing the korbanos bifnim, the inner korbanos on Yom Kippur, and you're supposed to be sprinkling up one up and one down and two down and three down, right? And you're in the middle of it, you're holding your basin and you're dipping your finger, and then all of a sudden the coin, clumsy, he drops it. So what do you got to do? So you got to go out and you got to get more blood. So there's an argument. How do you get more blood? Do you have to start all over from the beginning? Bring two new animals, one new one for Azazel, and bring shecht another one? Says Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, no, you just shecht another animal, catch the blood, and pick up where you left off. Now, why is that significant? Because all of the sprinklings that you're doing, why is it that you could just pick up where you left off? Because each separate sprinkling is a service. That's not one sprinkling is not dependent on the other sprinkling. Therefore, since he holds that every sprinkling is its own service, if you do any one of those sprinklings outside, you're going to be liable. That's why he agrees. Okay, next, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Elazar Omer af menasach mehachag bechag bachutz. Also, if you pour the water on sukkis outside, you are also liable on sukkis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Menachem Yud Fa'ah. So Rabbi Yochanan says the name of Rabbi Menachem Yud Fa'ah. Rabbi Elazar b'shitas Rabbi Akiva Rabbu Amra. Rabbi Elazar's Rebbe was Rabbi Akiva. And he's agreeing with his own Rebbe's shita.
Wow.
Da'amar niso chamayim de'oraisa. He holds that the service where they would draw water on sukkahs and they would pour it on the mizbeach, that was a Torah rule. Why? How do we see that? Because if it's not a Torah rule, why are you liable for doing that service outside? Must be because it's a Torah mandated service. Tanya, we're in a brisa. Rabbi Akiva says, the pasuk says, "Unisacheha," right? It says that you're on sukkahs. Besides milvad olas tamid, besides the olas tamid, minchasa unisacheha, which is plural. It's libations. I mean, not just the wine one, but there's another one. There's two of them. You have a libation of water and one of wine. Therefore, you are going to be liable also, according to Rabbi Akiva, because the pasuk says that there's such a thing as water. Okay? Amar Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, Malahalan shloshes lugin afkan shloshes lugin. Problem is that if you learn from the pasuk unisacheha, and we had learned this before, how much water do you need? So if unisacheha is the source, we're learning that both libations, the wine and the water, come from the same word. How much wine? We know how much wine we need. We need 3 lug of wine. So therefore, since they're both the same, learned from the same pasuk, water should also be 3 lugin. You need 3 lugin of water, 3 lugin of wine. Yeah, but V'ha Rabbi Elazar me'achad kamar, but Rabbi Elazar says, he said the water of the chag. The language that Rabbi Elazar uses in our Mishnah is if one pours the water from the chag, which means that it's less than even it's going to be the water from the water in the amount of the water that you need for sukkahs, which is not the same as the amount of water that you need as wine. So he holds that you only need 1 lug of water. So therefore, if he's learning it like Rabbi Akiva learns it, then why doesn't he not require 3 lugin? So the answer is E malaholon bishar yemos hashana afkan bishar yemos hashana. He says, 1 second. If what Rabbi Eliezer is saying, if he's learning it from Unasacheha, right, then not only is the problem that why would you be liable for only 1 lug of water, the other thing is, why are you only liable if you pour that water on sukkahs? Since pouring wine is prohibited every day of the year, so too, Afkan b'shar yemos hashana, you should also be liable for pour water outside the Beis Hamikdash any day of the year. Same thing. Rabbi Eliezer b'chag kamar. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, specifically it's only a problem on sukkahs. So, ishtemita say, hadam Ravasi. The problem is that Rabbi Menachem Yudfa must have forgotten that statement that Ravasi said. Dama Ravasi am Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi said to Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Nechunya ish bikas beis Chorsan. Right? In the name of Rabbi Nechunya, who is from a place of the valley of Beis Chorsan, he says, Eser Netios, 3 halachos. The ruling of the 10 plantings, and that is that the year of Shemitah, you're not allowed to plant anything, you're not allowed to plow anything. Not only you're not allowed to plow anything, you're not allowed to plow 30 days before the Shemitah year, because then that is preparing the ground for planting during the Shemitah year. The exception to that rule is if you have a field that has only 10 plants in a base saw, which is a very which is 2,500 square almost, I think it is what it is. But it's a very small density and they're very young plants. And the problem is that if you don't plow around them, they're going to die. So this extra ruling of 30 days before is a stringency. You have to stay away from plowing so that you don't benefit the crops during Shemitah year. But in this circumstance, if you don't do that, they'll actually die. There's no requirement to let your plants die.
So basically 30
days before,
Shemitah.
If you have plants of this type, you are allowed to plow.
If you don't, then you're going to get hit start of the Shemitah.
That's correct. So that's rule number 1. The aravos, there was a service during Sukkot that they would take these aravos and they would do a walk around the mizbeach, which is where we get our hakafos from. Our shanas from. That's where our shanas come from, right? So they would do everything. They would take. It's a question whether they would take their lulavs around and they would lean their aravos against the mizbeach, or whether they took their aravos and they walked around. But okay, either way, then they leaned them up against that procedure. And the nisuch hamayim and the pouring of the water ceremony we've been talking about are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. They're not learned from Sukkim.
The water puncture is called Simchas B'Sheva, no?
That is the simplest Beis HaShoeva, that's right. Well, the simplest Beis HaShoeva is the celebration because of the water drawing, right? The Nisuch HaMayim is the actual Korban, right? Those are all halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Therefore, that he agrees that it's a Torah rule, but he doesn't agree that it's the same source as Rabbi Akiva holds it from. So therefore, he doesn't require 3 lugin, and he says only prohibited on sukkahs. Tana Rabbanan, a rabbis learn, Hamanasik shoshesh lugin mayim bechag bachutz chayiv. If somebody pours 3 lug of water outside on sukkahs, you're chayiv. Rabbi Elazar says, im mil'on l'shem chag chayiv. Right? That's only if you actually filled the water up for the sake of sukkahs, right? Because you need to have, again, like every other korban, you need to have it sanctified for the purpose and have it valid as a korban. You can't just take a bottle of water and dump it outside and say, hey, it's mechag. It doesn't work that way.
So the whole purpose of this water is to be poured on the mizbeach, right?
Correct.
So what's this pouring outside? Like,
Because now we're doing this, because we're doing an avoda that's meant to be done outside, which is our prohibition.
When you're pouring the
Of
water,
shchutei chutz.
aren't you putting out the fire at the same time?
Well, on the outside, first of all, we don't necessarily there was a fire, but second of all, if you remember our diagram over there, right, you're pouring it on the corner, not into the fire, right? You're only pouring the water in the corner. So, but we had that question because we had the wine, right, where we had an argument whether you put the wine in the corner or whether you put the wine in the fire, but the water for sure goes in the corner. My beinayu, what is the difference of viewpoints here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak b'yesh shiur b'mayim kamiflagi. The argument is there an upper amount, right? The Tanakama says there's no amount. So therefore, even if you fill up more than 3 lug, right, you're going to be liable. I'm sorry. Yeah, he says it's any 3 lug or more, right? If you keep going up, it doesn't matter how much you have. But Rabbi Elazar, he disagrees. He says that there is an upper limit. 3 lug is the upper limit, and if you fill up more than 3 lug, so then the water is not sanctified, right? You messed it up, and therefore, because why? Because there's no utensil that was greater than 3 lug. So, the kli is only mekadesh that which is appropriate. So the kli would only sanctify 3 lug. There are kalim that are larger, right? We had discussed just earlier that they had half a hin kalim and things like that for sure. So therefore, this statement of the Tanakama that says if you fill up 3 lug, so then you're liable. That's because he says if you basically took a big bowl and you filled it up 4 lug and high. If you do that, then you're liable for the 3 lug. Says Rabbi Elazar, no, if you do that, you're not liable because you filled it up more than you needed. That means you're not doing it for the sake of Chag. Rav Papa Amar, he says, I'll explain to you what the difference is. He says the difference is Bekarvu Nesachim Bamidbar Pligi. The question is, did they bring Nesachim, did they bring any wine or any of those sorts of things in the desert? So this is because the pasuk in the Parshas Nesachim says, Ki savo eretz moshvosechem. When you get to Eretz Yisrael, so that's when you're going to start with the rules of pouring wine libations. So therefore, it sounds like that they didn't do that in the desert. All the korbanos, now they did it for the korbanos tzibur, right, wherever it said that we had to bring it. But individuals, they didn't bring any wine together with their korbanos in the midbar. So the question is, this pasuk that says that they didn't do it until they came into they didn't do something until they came into Eretz Yisrael, what are they talking about? So according to the Tanakama, the 14 years, they were dividing up the land and conquering the land. So according to the Tanakama, the 14 years that the Jewish people were in the desert, we're not talking about those 14 years. We're talking about the years that they were in the midbar before. So according to the Tanakama, the 40 years in the desert, they did bring the wine. So therefore, he says that when they came to Eretz Yisrael, where it says from now on, you're going to be bringing the wine. What he's saying is that even in a bama katana, right? That's with these bumbles that were individual ones, that everybody's going to be permitted to bring their korbanos on for 14 years.
At the same time, how were they able to bring the wine if they had to carry the stuff from the Mishkan as well at the same time?
Well, they only brought the wine when the Mishkan was set up. They weren't carrying anything at that point, right? They set it up. So, according to the opinion that says that they were bringing wine the whole time, this is now telling us that during, as we're going to learn, the time that the bumos became permitted is when they entered into Eretz Yisrael. You were then allowed, because there was no official dedicated place for the Mishkan. It was set up, but it wasn't dedicated as the only place to offer korbanos because the land had not been settled. So therefore, for those 14 years, people were bringing korbanos in their own individual places. So
the Mishkan was like a mini travel size Beis Hamikdash. So they would when they were dressed, wanted to bring korban, they would set it up and then
That's correct. That's how they would do it. Yes. But not when they wanted to, right? When Hashem said time to settle, then they would settle and build it. So again, since they were doing korbanos the whole time in the midbar, doing them with nisachim and everything. Then this pasuk says, well, now that you're coming into Eretz Yisrael, here's the rules of nisachim. Why? Because now that you're going to be working on your individual bamos, so your individual bamos are also going to require this rule of bringing nisachim. Okay, so therefore, since the bamas yachid, the individual bama, requires you to bring wine, so even though there's no klisharis, there's no service utensils by the individual bamos. So therefore, when you bring, what the Tanakama is saying is that when you bring your water, even if you pour that water not into a klisharis, you take your bottle of water and you pour it, you're going to be liable. Why? Because just like we learned that bringing the water, just like we learned by bringing the sachim was required by the individual bamos where there was no utensils, so too, if you do that outside, you're going to be liable. But Rabbi Elazar says, no, in the desert, there were no nesachim. Therefore, when the pasuk says you should start doing nesachim, it's not talking about your individual bamos. It's talking about in the Mishkan. The Mishkan, you can start doing in the Mishkan in Shiloh, you can start doing nesachim. But individual bamos never had nesachim, which means there was never an allowance to do any nesachim without utensils. Therefore, Rabbi Elazar says, unless you fill it up in a utensil, you're not liable for pouring the 3 lug of water. That's how he learns it. And then we'll just finish up the last bit. Ravina says, I will tell you what the argument is about. That they argue as follows, right? That according to him, both Rabbi Elazar and the Tanakama agree, according to this version, that they were bringing wine in the wine nesachim in the desert. And when they came in, they were told that you're also going to bring wine on your individual bamos. Okay, so that means you don't need a utensil. The question is it just because you don't need a utensil by wine, is that also true by water? Nesachim, do we learn again, like we said by Rabbi Akiva, that the water follows the same rules as the wine, and therefore you need a utensil? You don't need a utensil? Or is water its own thing? It's a public korban. And the public korbanos can only be brought in the Bama Gedola, in the Mishkan, even during the times that the Bamas were allowed, and therefore it does need a service utensil. And that's where the argument is. Does it need a service utensil or does it not need a service utensil? Okay, so that's where we're going to stop.
Tanur
Rabbanan at the top of second line of Kuf Yod Aleph.
Where the Gemara cites.
That's correct.
We're like 3 to 4. Tomorrow will be like 4, the 3 stuff behind and Gemara.
But we start, right? Today is Kuf Yod Gimel.
Yeah.